Do you want to know what the most powerful command in Fire Emblem is? It's not attack, it's not heal, it's not rescue or drop, it's not dance, though you shouldn't ditch your dancer. It's this one, end turn. Your ability to simply end your turn whenever you feel like it is the biggest advantage you have when playing Fire Emblem. That might seem absurd, because it is. At face value, ending your turn doesn't do anything. It's the opposite. It's forfeiting your ability to do anything beyond what you've already done. But let me show you some things that I have done on my channel through the magic of spamming the end turn button. All of these strategies have something in common. Not just that they all look a bit silly, but they're only possible because I was not afraid of mercilessly mashing that end turn button every time it was to my advantage to do so. Now you might be thinking something along the lines of, come on Mecha, it's not end turn that's enabling these strategies, if you can even call them that. There's something else going on in each of these clips. It just so happens that you're spamming end turn like crazy in all of them. And I'll give you partial credits. The title and the premise of this video are kinda baiting, but there is some truth to it. Because what is enabling these strategies is not just the end turn button, but the fact that I can use it as often as I like without consequences. What makes these strategies so powerful is not that my turn can end whenever I want, but it's that I can do so and the game cannot do anything about it. Try looking at it this way. If I end my turn and everything on the battlefield stays the same between the end of this player phase and the start of the next one, this command basically refreshes all of my units for free. The end turn button basically becomes a global dancer that I can use as many times as I want. All my units can take an infinite number of actions. Let me walk you through some of these degenerate strategies that completely break the game in half if you know about them. First off, what you see here is me grinding up Edward in 4 Prologue during my Radiant Dawn Iron Man playthrough. He is still in first tier, Myrmidon, because I barely used him at all before part 4. But before I routed this map, I had trapped the last enemy on a healing bush and had Edward wail on him for over 300 turns. The chip experience added up over time, and by the end I had a level 16 Swordmaster on my hands. Edward gained over 30 levels from one enemy. The second example is from my FE6 Let's Play, where I tried out how good Lyn was in the Binding Blade. I wanted Lyn to have a good support partner, so I decided to train Lilina. I trapped a large group of reinforcements behind a choke point, rendering them unable to do anything. And then I killed them through the wall one by one using Lilina. Most of the enemies only had one range, so they couldn't counter her. And before enemy phase, I always made sure to rescue drop her to safety. And as a bonus, I could end Lina's turn next to Lyn's every time to make sure that they build their support rank. Now so far I've just shown you end turn abuse once a map is near completion, but it can also be used to trivialize a map when it's still supposed to be putting pressure on the player. This bit is from my FE5 Negative Growth playthrough in chapter 4. At first glance it looks like I'm not accomplishing much, but I'm effectively killing up to 4 enemies every turn. There are supposed to be soldiers appearing from all sides of the map, but because my units are blocking the spawn points, they can't. And that gives me all the time in the world to run around with my units, obtaining treasure and trading around items until turn 64. At that point, the reinforcements stop coming and I can move towards the end of the map. End turn spam can also be used to your advantage when there is real-time pressure though. In a speedrun or a draft race, the fastest possible player phase is where you end turn immediately without moving any of your player characters. So in Defend and Survive maps, you try to play the first couple of turns in such a way that you can do exactly that for the remainder of the map. Now I realize that most of you don't play like that, so here's an example that you can probably relate to. I like to call this strategy the Giant Ball of Death. Basically, you group all your units together, tanky units go in front and frill units right behind them. Your durable units bait over the few enemies that can reach you, and then on player phase you pile on that unfortunate group with all you've got, and then they're gone. From there, you move your tanks forward a little bit and repeat the process. This strategy accomplishes two things. One, it reverses the numbers advantage enemies normally have on you. Usually, your average Fire Emblem map has about 30 to 40 enemies, and the player has about 10. But that doesn't matter when you're only baiting 3 of them in range of 10 of yours. And 2, it ensures that the few enemies you do fight on enemy phase only get to engage with your strongest units, often equipped with the best weapons to deal with them. So not only are you effectively diminishing their numbers, you're also rigging the matchups in your favor. This is a good strategy for most Fire Emblem games. I use it a lot in my Let's Plays, my streams, and even offline playthroughs. Once you figure out how to do this, you can break about 80% of all Fire Emblem maps. It even lets you get through Iron Man runs with few to no deaths. And probably best of all, this strategy lets you train any units no matter how bad their bases are, because they can get carried by your other units until they're able to stand on their own. The Fire Emblem AI often just cannot deal with the giant ball of death, because it usually doesn't know any better than to either stand completely still or attack any player unit they find in their attacking range. I say often cannot deal with this because there is a catch. The giant ball of death works flawlessly until it doesn't. Over the years, Fire Emblem developers have found two main ways to deal with it, and the giant ball of death really falls apart when the map is designed to beat it. The first one is time pressure, not in terms of real time, but in terms of turn count. Generally, the way Fire Emblem does time pressure comes down to this. If you don't do this by turn X, you lose out on a reward. Get to the village before a brigand destroys it. Get to the treasure room before the enemy thief steals the treasure. Get to this recruitable character before they are overwhelmed by the enemy. These are examples of optional time pressure. You can opt to ignore them, but then you miss out on something you might want. Usually, I think this is a sufficient way to light a fire underneath a player's butt. Most players are completionists. They want those rewards, so they will play faster to try and get the optional reward. But sometimes Fire Emblem dials things to 11 and says, go fast or you get second place. And by second place, I mean you lose. This can be a soft loss condition. For example, sometimes they will deploy strong reinforcements that encourage you to get out of the chapter before they catch up to you. But then, if you have a very powerful unit, they can hold off these enemies or even defeat them. At other times, it's a hard time limit where the game just says, you have X amount of turns, win by then, or you lose the map. The Three Houses DLC has a map just like this. Something like FE7's Battle Before Dawn is kind of in between. The goal of the chapter is to protect Zephiel. Jafar is usually able to hold off the enemies for long enough to keep him out of danger until the player is able to get there, but sometimes Jafar gets unlucky and just dies. The sooner you make it down there, the lower the chances of Jafar and or Zephiel biting the dust. But sometimes you make it there even when going slow, and at other times you can be as fast as Greased Lightning but still get a game over. So that's the first way Fire Emblem games deal with the giant ball of death, time pressure. The second way is kind of a reverse. They improve enemy formations, reinforcements and AI to better equip them for a turtling player. Basically saying, alright, if you want a turtle, if you want to use the giant ball of death, go ahead, but the game will be ready for you. There is no better example of this than Fire Emblem Conquest on Lunatic mode. Everyone who has played this mode knows, Conquest Lunatic does not mess around. It uses every trick in the book to punish the player for attacking, defending, moving, basically existing. The enemies are usually in groups that are big enough to be a threat, but not so large to be unfair. You can overwhelm them if you play smart, but you generally cannot just trivialize them with the classic bait and switch. Conquest enemies don't like moving unless more than one of their group have a legal attack to perform, and they don't like attacking unless they can actually deal damage. In addition, they often have access to stat debuffs that can weaken a tanky unit. In the late game, these debuffs can get so large that even your most tanky units become squishies. Basically, Conquest Lunatic counters your turtling with some turtling of its own. Now, Conquest Lunatic is mean, but not even close to unbeatable. The enemy has a lot of options, but so does the player. And through a combination of clever planning, the use of powerful tools, or some good stat stacking of your own, a prepared player can still make Conquest look like a day at the playground. It's one of the most fun and satisfying games to trivialize because in some shape or form you have to think beyond the giant ball of death strategy. That's not to say that the giant ball of death doesn't work at all anymore. There are a lot of situations where it absolutely does, but you usually have to add a little spice to it, and sometimes it might not work at all. Some people think I'm a very good Fire Emblem player, and maybe I am, but Conquest is one of those games that often fills me with decision paralysis because the giant ball of death has always been the basis for the way I approach a challenging map. Conquest really forces me to go out of my comfort zone, make me figure out different types of plans, either by planning my team out beforehand or just approaching the map in a different way. And in my opinion, that's a good thing because it makes my victories more satisfying and it made me a better player. I like that the game is making me do this. And that's why I made this video, not just to argue that the end turn button is almighty, although that was definitely a fun thought experiment, but what I really want to get across here is that strategies like the giant ball of death can easily become a crutch. It can become your way to tackle every map you come across, and this can backfire once you get into a game or difficulty mode that can punish you for it. That said, I hope you understand I'm not judging anyone for using slow strategies. That would be awfully hypocritical of me, since I started this video with demonstrations of me doing exactly those strategies. And after I'm done with this video, chances are I'm about to play Fire Emblem using other slow strategies because it's still enjoyable to me. Instead, what I'm hoping to accomplish here is explain why it can be worth occasionally looking beyond strategies such as the giant ball of death to broaden your options a little bit. Sometimes when I'm playing, for example to gather background footage, I deliberately play as if my turns are limited even when they're not. I find that even a small self-imposed challenge like that makes the game a lot more interesting. If you want a good example, look no further than Echoes' Blitzkrieg achievement. It's really lenient. You have to beat the game within 500 turns. But the moment you start playing, you might notice, oh, my turns are limited. I cannot just sit here and do nothing in a turn. I need to make the most of what I've got. And you start looking at the game in a whole different way. You know how in Fire Emblem games you usually hoard resources a bit since you don't know when you will need them? What's happening there is you get an instinct to hoard turns, even though you know you have more than enough to complete the game. I find that effect fascinating and enriching, and I think that's something worth trying. And if you try it and decide it's not for you, and that's fine. Let me know in the comments what your experience was. Heck, if any part of this video resonates with you, such as the giant ball of death strategy, let me know down below. And while you're down there, feel free to recruit the thumbs up button by turning it blue. Thank you for watching.